to Ask an Ecologist. My name is Suzanne Simpson, and I'm an ecologist with Bayou Land Conservancy in Houston, Texas. And each week we get together and I take your nature questions about all things outdoors, and we get to learn a little bit about the natural world in our backyards. We were off last week for the first time since we really started Asking an Ecologist in March, but we're back with a list of a few questions and a couple of fun things to talk about, so I'm excited to be here with you. Let's get to your questions. All right, first, we have a request to talk about peregrine falcons because peregrine falcons winter here in the Houston area. So peregrine falcons are a smallish raptor that are found on every continent in the world except for Antarctica. However, peregrine falcons were nearly wiped out in the 60s because of the widespread use of DDT. If you're not familiar, DDT was a chemical used as a pesticide, and it was used a fungicide, something that was used to even spray down soldiers in wars. And it was so widely used that it was starting to really adversely affect a lot of wildlife, especially birds, because the chemicals in DDT would cause the eggs of birds to break down, and so they weren't able to reproduce their young. So the bald eagles were profoundly affected by that, as were the peregrine falcons. So the peregrine falcons population went way down during that time, but after the chemical DDT was removed, peregrine falcons started to slowly make a resurgence. And after being listed for almost 30 years on the endangered species list, they were finally removed in 1999. Now, since they've been removed, peregrine falcons have actually started to adapt pretty well to the urban environments that are there for them to take advantage of. There are a couple of reasons why they're so good at this. First of all, they have a food source in the city that is pretty easy to take advantage of, and that is pigeons. Peregrine falcons are well known, especially in the UK. There have been a lot of reports of this. They'll dive bomb pigeons from skyscrapers up to 1,000 feet up, and they'll dive bomb pigeons. They can reach speeds of up to 200 miles per hour, which is how they are the fastest animal on Earth. And they are able to also take advantage of skyscrapers because the way that we build them, it's sort of like having a cliff face, and that's where peregrine falcons in the wild would naturally like to nest. So you'll see peregrine falcons starting to make nests on these skyscrapers, and that's where they'll actually raise their young. Now, some humans have really embraced having peregrine falcons as their neighbors. First of all, they're a super cool bird. They help keep the feral pigeon population under control, and so they've actually incorporated nest boxes into their building design so that there's a safe place for peregrine falcons to nest in these skyscrapers. I haven't heard of this happening in Houston yet, mostly because, peregrine falcons really are just wintering here. But I would be interested to hear if anywhere in the United States people have seen peregrine falcons nesting in skyscrapers. It's a pretty cool way to take advantage of what is in their built environment and persist beyond the sort of natural outdoor cliff faces that they would use. So peregrine falcons, very adaptable, a great recovery story, and a great story of the Endangered Species Act, bringing a bird back from the brink of extinction. So yeah, good bird, love it. I enjoy seeing them every winter. Our next question was asking about birds flying in the woods. So it says, when you see how dense the woods are behind my house, how can birds fly so fast through the woods and never hit anything? It seems impossible to me. Well, first of all, not all birds can do this. Not all birds are able to fly really agilely in thick woods. And so those birds that can't do it are going to be found in areas that have a little bit more of wide open space between trees, or they might shirk the forest altogether and head to the grasslands. But those woodland songbirds that you see in those, in thick places behind people's houses and whatnot, they're able to avoid running into objects all the time because those woodland songbirds have really, really acute vision. So that, number one, helps. And number two, they're able to see some types of UV light that humans can't see, and that helps direct their landing during times of dawn and dusk when light is low. But for those woodland songbirds, they're not really doing any crazy agile flying that is a spectacle. They're really just avoiding things by using their vision and their depth perception. On the other hand, you might see some hawks flying around back there, like sharp-shinned hawks or Cooper's hawks in the genus Accipiter. And those hawks have a different way of avoiding trees and avoiding branches. Their tail feathers are able to move really, really quickly to help guide their flight so that they can do sort of a more aerial acrobatic display whenever they're flying through the forest. And it's really impressive if you ever get the chance to see it. So all in all, birds just have a couple of adaptations that have enabled them to fly through the woods. Now, of course, they do have aerial accidents. I mean, there will be moments where a bird will run into a branch or run into a tree. But for the most part, they're pretty good at avoiding those things because of their vision and their flying adaptations. All right. So I wanted to mention Bayou Land Conservancy's virtual gala is this Friday from 6 to 7 p.m. And each week we have been chatting during Ask An Ecologist about our sponsorship levels because they're named after some of our favorite taxa. So I'm going to close out that series by talking about the last two taxa that we've named a sponsorship level after, and they are the Texas lantana and the bluebonnet. So we'll start with the Texas lantana. Texas lantana is a low shrub. It will almost be called a shrub because it can grow pretty prolifically, but it's a wildflower that is relatively easy to cultivate, and that's because it is Texas tough. It's resistant to drought, it's resistant to deer, and it's resistant to disturbance. It actually thrives in full Texas summer sun, that unabated summer sun, and it's one of those plants that you can start out whenever you're in a disturbed area to try and get some new native plantings in those areas that have been disturbed, because they can really withstand a lot of conditions. They can withstand different salinity levels in the soil. They're a really hardy plant, and that makes them a great plant for your garden. They produce these clusters of reddish orange and yellow flowers. There are also a lot of varieties of lantana period, but also Texas lantana. And so whenever you are purchasing something for your garden, you want to be cognizant of whether or not you're purchasing the native lantana or whether you might be purchasing the tropical lantana or another varietal that isn't what you're looking for. So lantana also produce a dark black purplish berry that is toxic to humans and most mammals. So this is another way that they're deer resistant, but birds love these berries, and birds will absolutely feast on them, and that is really helpful for the lantana to propagate because birds are great at seed dispersal. So this is a plant that is super well adapted to our environment, and if you're looking to get started with a backyard garden and you want something that's really kind of almost foolproof, Texas lantana is an easy plant to get started with. Really pretty flowers, and it'll come out in the summer whenever it feels like, how could something possibly live in this heat? But they're down for it. They love it. Okay, and then our next flower that we're going to go over is the bluebonnet, which is, of course, our state flower. It's an absolute Texas icon. Bluebonnets were a part of intentional flower propagation efforts kind of led by Lady Bird Johnson. And the reason for that was, the Don't Mess with Texas campaign, trying to reduce the amount of litter we had in Texas roadways and just trying to beautify our highways to make Texas a pretty place to drive through. There are these intentional propagation efforts where Lady Bird Johnson thought that Texans would be too proud to throw trash outside of their vehicle if it was going to land on our state flower. And she wasn't wrong. It definitely helped beautify our roadways and helped to reduce litter. And now, practically everywhere you go in the state during the months of March and April, you're going to see a display of bluebonnet flowers. They're famous for being places for family photos, and they're a really hardy plant that is endemic to Texas and parts of Mexico. So it's a great candidate for our state flower. Like any popular wildflower, bluebonnets have been subject to cultivation. So there are different species naturally of bluebonnets in Texas. There are 3 or 4 different species of bluebonnets, but they've also been subject to intentional cultivation to try and create different colors of bluebonnets. In fact, there's an old Texas legend about a pink bluebonnet. So the story is that 2 kids are walking through a field of bluebonnets and they see some that are blue, but they see some that are white.